So tonight we are here to talk about the NIH Health Village, which is a Phase 1 specific plan, as well as a Phase 1 concept zoning map amendment. So before we get started, I'd just like to say that it really does take a team to make a case like this and to bring it before you all today. I think almost everybody in City Hall and out in the bounds of the city everywhere probably touched this case in some degree, or held my hand, or talked me through and educated me on how to best bring this case to you all today. So I want to shout out, and if I forgot anybody, I'm so sorry, but we really do work with the most amazing group of people here in Flagstaff. So with that, we'll get started. This is the NIH Health Village. The property is located at 1120 West Purple Sage Trail. The proposed use for Phase 1 is up to 1.15 million square feet of hospital and medical offices, as well as 31.2 acres of open space and civic space. Phase 2 will include supporting uses, which include approximately 315 residential dwelling units as part of a mixed-use development, approximately 230,000 square feet of non-residential uses, and approximately 250,000 square feet of research and development uses. This request includes the adoption of a new specific plan for approximately 172.6 acres, and the concept zoning map amendment of 98.39 acres from rural residential and estate residential to highway commercial for 63 acres and public facilities for 35.21. Those are all gross acres, so I'll try not to get confused between the gross and the net. Also, we're adding 3 parcels into the resource protection overlay. I don't want to forget that. So here is where the property is located. It's this faint blue outline. It does sit north of Fort Tuthill County Park. It is across I-17 from Ponderosa Trails, as well as the City of Flagstaff Airport. It is to the hospital site itself is to the east of an area of land that is large lot, single-family residential, and it's to the south of both vacant land and a county holding parcel or area known as Mountain Dell. So the purpose of a specific plan is to provide a greater level of detail for a geographic area or element of the regional plan, and to provide for the systematic implementation of the regional plan. Specific plans can be adopted as master plans for development when they accompany a request for rezoning. The development of specific plans is essential for the implementation of the Flagstaff Regional Plan and its vision. These plans are necessary to further determine the nature and scale of activity centers, corridors, and neighborhoods, as well as the cross-sections and alignment of future corridors and the priority and goals in a particular area. So the planning framework for this specific plan divides the total 172.6 acre site into 7 land use areas. So this is, again, setting what that planning framework will be for the entire health village. This would include land use areas 1A and 1B. Those are the areas in green, 35.2 acres. They are included in this portion of the rezoning request. Land use area 2A, which is a 17-acre site. It is intended for mixed use. It is located on the far north portion of the property. Land use area 2B, which is just over 63 acres. It is the main location of the hospital. This is also a parcel subject to the rezoning that you're looking at tonight. Then you have land use area 2C, which is part of that overall hospital island, but will be a separate block. It will also be rezoned at a separate time. It is likely intended for a hospital, but could be some other type of commercial use. It is likely intended for a hotel, but could be some other commercial use. Further south, we have land use area 2D, about 25 acres, which is also intended for more supporting commercial uses. And then land use area 3, just under 30 acres, intended for research and development uses, affiliated with the hospital and self-supporting as well. The specific plan, Arizona Revised Statute provides the authority for the scope for municipalities to adopt a specific plan. They may be adopted either through an ordinance or through a resolution. In this case, we're looking at adopting this particular specific plan through ordinance. The Arizona Revised Statutes allows the specific plan to create regulations determining the location of buildings and other improvements with respect to existing rights-of-way, floodplains, and public facilities. It also allows the specific plan to create regulations of the use of land, buildings, and structures, including the height and bulk of buildings and structures and the open spaces around those buildings. So we'll talk quickly about what the zoning code modifications are that you'll see within this specific plan. The first is in regard to site planning design standards. In this particular case, the City of Flagstaff site planning design standards are looking for a building forward design. So we want to get the buildings as close as possible to the street. One, because of the accessibility for transit, for bikes and pedestrians, instead of having large parking fields in front of buildings. In this case, the hospital location is in close proximity to I-17 as well as the existing airport. Hospitals, I am told, are sensitive to noise and sound, and for that reason, the applicants have requested to stray from our typical site planning design standards to allow the building to be set back further, which would allow a larger parking field to be located in front of the building. Additionally, our architectural design standards are proposed to be modified. This includes modifying the building materials to allow EIFS or stucco as more of a primary building material. This is for the largest portion of the building, the tower, the patient tower, which is also the tallest portion of the building. While stucco is not a primary material for the City of Flagstaff, it does work well on a building of this height in terms of giving the building definition. A lot of our other smaller grain materials are lost on a building of this particular height. Additionally, NAH guidelines modify our building and massing scales. The building does a good job of the proposed building is doing a good job of breaking itself down in terms of massing, but it doesn't meet our specific articulation standards, which can be difficult to achieve, especially with this particular type of use. Additionally, the specific code is looking to amend our bicycle parking standards by enhancing or increasing our required bicycle parking and including bicycle parking spaces that are covered and included within the garage. Also, NAH is proposing to alter the definition of meeting facilities, public or private, to include the possibility of a conference center or convention center. This is a use that's not clearly called out in our code. It was great that this was brought to light. I hope to bring this forward to you in a future code amendment so that we can make sure that this is a use properly and adequately covered by our code. Next up, we have specific standards or modifications to the zoning districts themselves. In terms of the public facility zone, it's about the uses that are allowed in the zone. So NAH is proposing to amend the allowed uses of the PF zone to prohibit the development of libraries, museums, residential uses, cemeteries, government offices, government service maintenance facilities, and municipal airports. All other listed uses remain the same. None of the PF zone building form or property development standards are modified by this specific plan. Additionally, to the highway commercial zone standards, NAH proposed to amend the uses of the HC zone by prohibiting most of the uses that are not compatible with the proposed hospital and ACC uses, ACC Ambulatory Care Center. The hospital is modified from requiring a conditional use permit to being a permitted use. We've gone through a lot of work. The thought process here is that an additional conditional use permit really doesn't get us anything additional. We're doing lots of public outreach, lots of public hearings and comments, so an additional use permit at this point probably doesn't help us much in this process. And one new use has been added. These include, so all other listed uses are listed only as permissible as an accessory use, right? A restaurant, for example, most hospitals do have a cafe. They have a place for people to eat at. So there's a number of uses because the hospital itself is sort of like this little island of which, and in this mixed use building where all of these different things occur. So those uses will still be allowed. They'll just be considered accessory to the primary use of the hotel and medical offices. One new use is added, and that includes the airport's landing strips because there is a helipad. There's a helipad at the existing hospital site. There will be a helipad located here. That helipad will be located on the top of the tallest tower of this building. In terms of the highway commercial zone standards, the building form and property development standards are modified to allow a maximum building height of 160 feet. I know that council has specifically requested the dimensions and how that height breaks out. The applicant is prepared to provide that information to you, as their site plan, which is currently being reviewed by staff, is not part of this application. Additionally, so they can go over the height and the reasonings for the height, the proposal. They do a much better job at explaining their building than I ever can. But the applicant has also provided a view shed analysis. Staff's primary concern in looking at a building of a taller height is what will be that ultimate view shed analysis impact to the surrounding community. So I'm going to run through some pictures for you really quickly. This is, of course, we're looking up in the air down at the hospital, but I think it gives you a great image of the site overall, because to really see the site as a whole, you'd have to be looking up, down towards the project. So you can see the main hospital tower running east-west. You can see the ambulatory care center out in front. You can see the hospital, and you can see the variations in height, modulation, and articulation. So let's talk about where this building will be visible from. This viewpoint is from Mountain Dell. Because of the differential in topography and the length of distance, it is unlikely that any portion of even the tallest portions of this hospital will be seen from Mountain Dell or from that particular community. This is one of the locations where the building would most likely be visible, and this is from Sinclair Wash Trail, which does run through the subject property. This is an existing trail. This trail will be surrounded by at least 10 acres of open space, but the hospital will be visible from this location. This is looking from Getaway Trail that is directly west. This is sort of the residential area. It is likely there will be some pieces or places where some of the building could be visible. You're not seeing a lot here. Again, I think it's going to be different based on how close you are within the vicinity to the hospital itself. Here are views basically adjacent to the site. So from Woody Mountain Road, I mean, the building will not, it's not that the building is invisible. It will obviously be visible from certain locations. And it's certainly going to be visible from the adjacent streets. So Woody Mountain Road, you're going to see this length of building. They've added in that proposed future tower extension, which would be an additional bed tower sometime in the future. This is from the parking lot inside Fort Tuthill, which accesses the bike park. And you can see that very little of the proposed hospital is shown from inside this particular area, Fort Tuthill. It doesn't mean that from all areas that it would not be visible. Again, it's going to just depend on your elevation and the tree line of what you're going to see. And lastly, from Ponderosa Trails, very little visibility of the proposed hospital. Where you're really going to see that hospital is when you're on I-17 and when you're on the immediate surrounding streets. That's where it'll be the most visible. In terms of specific plans are required to do a certain set of community services impact analysis. You'll be most familiar with these types of impact analysis that are affiliated with rezonings, because that's what we see most of the time. In terms of rezonings, you're seeing transportation impact analysis, stormwater impact analysis, and water and sewer. In this case, a specific plan requires a much broader community service impact analysis, including police and fire. So you can see that we have reached out to our police department and consulted on this particular project. A specific impact analysis was not required, but the feedback provided is that the new hospital will be about 4.6 miles from the current headquarters, compared with the distance of 1.8 miles to the current medical facility. This may result in response times a couple minutes slower than currently provided, and the extra distance will have marginal cost impact to the department. So there was little concern here in terms of the overall separation or the relocation of this particular facility. Next up, we have a fire impact analysis. There were three different analyses done in regard to fire. The first is in regard to wildland fire risk assessment, because of course we're taking a facility now that's currently within our urban core and we're moving it out to the exterior fringe adjacent to the wildland urban interface. The results of this study provide recommendation mitigation measures for fuel management. A lot of this work has already occurred on site. If you've traveled by it in the recent past, you'll see that thinning work has occurred. I know that there have been concerns in the past about that, meaning work has already commenced on site, but the thinning is necessary. Whether this project is approved or not, that thinning is a good thing for us and the community as well. So a lot of that work has already commenced and started. There are mitigation measures for building materials as well as general recommendations for the overall development of the health village. Those mitigation measures have been incorporated within the specific plan. Additionally, there were 2 studies completed looking at specifically our ability to serve this property with our fire department resources. The most recent study was completed in November of 2022, and that's a standard of cover analysis. So the City of Flagstaff was already working on this analysis because we know that of potential future expansion and growth and development in the John Wesley Powell corridor. NAH was able to collaborate with the existing consultant for that study and to come up with some particular findings on how NAH may impact our existing resources. What I can tell you from that study is that the Flagstaff Fire Department does not currently meet the minimum staffing requirements or national standards or best practices as development exists today. It is recommended that we have a fully staffed ladder company. Because the hospital is a high-rise tower, which means it is a higher risk occupancy, it definitely accentuates the need that we move some resources out of current locations to help deal with this high-risk facility. So we need to relocate existing fire resources. So we already need a fully staffed ladder company. We now need to relocate that ladder company. The closest station to the NAH proposed facility is on Lake Murray Road, station number 6. That station is too small to accommodate the additional equipment necessary, so we are looking at possibly relocating that particular station as part of this request. In terms of schools, they talk about the fact that this particular development isn't intended to have a significant impact, especially with the amount of housing that's required. But as development is occurring in this area, they'll need to be looking for school sites in the future. And an economic impact analysis was done. I'll try to go through this all very quickly. These are highlight bullet points. This is definitely a 20-page document, but the highlights are that construction expenditures are projected at over $1 billion over 23 years. And that's the construction life of the entire health village. Project construction could support over 10,000 direct jobs and close to 3,200 indirect jobs over the 23-year period. Once the health village is developed, the project could generate an annual economic impact of $387 million in the region and could employ an estimated 1,985 people at build-out. An estimated 113 million direct labor income are anticipated at build-out. Annual off-site visitor spending is estimated at $9.8 million by 2036. And the jobs generated by the health village could support an estimated local population of 2,600 people, which approximately half would reside in Flagstaff. And the health village could generate an estimated $39.1 million in sales tax, board and beverage tax, property taxes, and state shared revenue to the City of Flagstaff over the next 23 years. Lastly, the last but not the least, needed community service impact is in regards to our parks. We are in desperate need of regional park facilities in our community, and this area is not any different than any other area, but because it's just starting its development, it is underserved by parks. And I know that sounds odd coming from the fact that it sits directly adjacent to the county Fort Tuthill Park. But there is a need for active recreation and sports fields. Instead of requiring an impact analysis, PRO's staff worked with their existing master plan, which identifies a deficiency of parks and sports fields and community recreation fields in this particular area. In working with with staff and the applicant, our PRO's staff requested that some form of active recreation amenity be added to the wellness retreat area that is operated and maintained by the applicant. And the applicant has agreed to evaluate and include such an amenity in their wellness retreat. That particular wellness retreat has not yet been designed. So let's jump into the concept zone plan. We talked before about there being 63.1 acres to be rezoned to highway commercial. Again, that's that area here that's in purple. And then we're looking at rezoning the area in green to public facility. The reason that public facility is chosen instead of public open space is because of the fact that active recreation is recommended for this site. Public open space is more limited, that particular zoning category is limited to more passive recreation opportunities. So of the 14 parcels included in the request, 3 were not included in the resource protection overlay, and so those remaining 3 will be added as part of this rezoning request. The rezoning request is primarily to permit the development of a new regional hospital, ambulatory care center, and associated medical offices, and includes over 30 acres of open space intended to function as a wellness retreat. The first phase of the development includes an approximately 751,850 square foot hospital with room for future expansion, just over 200,000 square foot ambulatory care center, and just under 500,000 square foot parking garage, as well as their affiliated central utility plant. The first phase of the hospital will include 276 patient beds, which is 35 more beds than the current hospital. We talked about the property being within the resource protection overlay. What I can tell you is that they will have no problem meeting their resource protection overlay standards. All of the zoning categories that they're looking at will require 30% preservation of the trees. There are no slopes. There are no floodplains that need to be preserved on this site. In terms of open space and civic space, this is just a rough look at what this area will provide, but it is a good refuge for the entire health village. It will provide that community space. It is intended to be open for the public. And again, there really are 2 spaces. There's the one that will be the open space around the existing Sinclair Wash Foots Trail, and then the wellness retreat, which will be closer and more affiliated with the hospital use itself. In terms of landscaping and outdoor lighting, landscaping is not required to be reviewed as this level of rezoning, and neither is outdoor lighting. However, concerns were discussed in regards to outdoor lighting because of the height of the tower. So the concern here is more about the spillage of light out of the tower bedrooms itself than it is about the light that will be at the ground. The hospital is located in lighting zone 2. They will be able to comply with those standards, hopefully. And the hospital has also proposed adding shades on each of the windows on the north and east elevations that will operate on a timer to reduce impacts from light spillage outside of the windows during the nighttime periods. Additionally, architectural elements have been added to the building to help screen these windows from the direction of the observatory. So there are small little architectural features that also screen these windows as well. Parking calculations. So this is something that staff is reviewing as part of the site plan application. Hospitals are definitely a site that have unique parking calculations. We haven't had a new hospital built in the city of Flagstaff in quite some time. I would say that we haven't spent a lot of time looking at or updating our code in regards to hospitals and what's the appropriate amount of parking. In working with NAH, they decided that parking is a significant need for their site. They have included a parking garage so that they can exceed the surface parking. So we only allow a developer to exceed surface parking by 5% unless you build a parking garage affiliated with that. So that is the case in this instance. Bicycle parking, like I stated earlier, is also part of the application, and there's both surface bicycle parking as well as bicycle parking included within the garage. So let's talk about the bicycle and pedestrian circulation system. The applicant has done a lot to create a site that is friendly to bikes and peds, as well as transit as well, even though the site is not currently served by public transit. So bike and pedestrian circulation includes the development of multiple footpaths, as well as on-street buffered bike lanes, as well as off-street multimodal paths. So there is a combination. Martin has spent hours of time with us, helping us vet out the most appropriate bike and ped facilities for each particular street within this system. And if you have particular questions, I can work on getting you answers on those. So with this, I'm going to ask Steph Santana to come up and go through the TIA for you.
Good afternoon. My name is Steph Santana. I'm a transportation engineer here at the City of Flagstaff. I'll be providing some details and information specific to the NIH Transportation Impact Analysis. Just a brief overview, a transportation impact analysis is referred to as a TIA, and it's a document that analyzes a developer's impacts on the roadway network. NIH has expressed many times that this is a regional hospital, meaning people are coming from the west, Kingman, from the north, the reservation, the south, Camp Verde, and the east, maybe as far as the New Mexico border, all to receive state-of-the-art care. Most trips will be vehicle trips, although there are a number of shuttle services that will be provided to local shelters and mountain line transit stops. A hospital of this magnitude required looking at the City of Flagstaff as a whole, and that's why the full build-out TI includes roughly 32 study intersections and spans from the western city boundary, the Flagstaff Ranch traffic interchange, all the way to the eastern city boundary, the Country Club traffic interchange. The full build-out TIA includes 3 different study years, which spanned over a 40-year period, and was estimated to generate approximately 53,000 new trips. Due to the compressed timeline and the complexity of the TIA, NIH requested to shift to a phased TIA process, allowing them to move forward with mitigating the impacts of just the hospital and ambulatory care center, which is the focus of today's hearing. Phase 1 utilized a 2027 study year and is projected to generate approximately 15,000 new daily trips, which is about 28% of the full build-out, 53,000 trips. The Phase 2 full build-out TIA and project development is expected shortly after Phase 1 is constructed. With a tight timeline and a few back and forths, the Phase 1 TIA was approved by city staff March 30th, 2023. The scope for the Phase 1 TIA was reduced by the transportation engineering staff to only include the corridors and intersections that were most directly affected by the project. The required Phase 1 improvements include the widening of the Beulah corridor to a 4-lane cross-section from Woodlands Village Boulevard to John Wesley Powell, and specific intersection improvements along Beulah and the John Wesley Powell corridors. Back in December of 2022, NIH was granted a regional plan amendment to keep Beulah in its current location for better development of their parcel. More recently, NIH has requested to delay the build of the intersection of Beulah and Purple Sage to the proper grades needed for the future I-17 underpass. This is because the grades at this location are difficult to work with, which was why it was originally planned for Beulah to pull away from I-17 in this particular area. So looking at the map here, This was the original regional plan, and you can see Beulah is the blue line here, and Beulah was proposed to pull away from I-17 in order to get grades for the future underpass to go under I-17 here, the orange road. NAH proposed to keep Beulah in the original location, which is technically under this big black line, which is I-17, and that's why they're struggling to get grades in this area along Beulah. Staff wanted to note a few things to consider. This underpass was in the last version of the regional plan and was recently confirmed by Metro Plan to be included in this next version of the regional plan as well. The Metro Plan model considers other possible developments in the area, including a 450-acre state trust parcel shown here in white, along with a 30-acre city parcel just on the northeast side of the John Wesley Powell and I-17 interchange, approximately right here. Once the John Wesley Powell Bridge is widened to a 4-lane cross-section, which is proposed by NAH and needed for Phase 2, and NAH is fully built out, the bridge will have approximately 11% capacity left, which is not enough for future developments in the area. The Beulah and Purple Sage Underpass is a very important addition that will allow trips to distribute between Lake Mary, Purple Sage, and John Wesley Powell. John Wesley Powell and Lake Mary are 3 miles apart, and this has been deemed the best location for a future underpass. That's all I have. I'm here for questions.
All right, so moving right along, we're getting to our water and sewer impact analysis, which was completed February 2022 with an amended letter in December 5th, 2022. Essentially for water, there's a required water infrastructure, includes a 16-inch water main extended through the project site. This water line will create a loop from a well on the Fort Tudhill property to the existing 12-inch main located at the intersection of Litzler Drive and University Heights Drive South. Additionally, water lines to be constructed within the site shall feed off that main that connects to Fort Tudhill Extension. The applicant must also construct a water storage tank and the associated water lines to connect it to the Zone B system. The tank shall store a minimum net volume of 685,000 gallons. And for wastewater, the main sewer service for this project has been completed. It's the 18-inch sewer extension from Fort Tudhill to University Heights. The county paid for the cost to complete this infrastructure improvement and has elected to participate in the reimbursement agreement. The applicant will be required to reimburse the county the cost of their proportionate share as determined in the reimbursement agreement. Stormwater analysis is what you commonly see for most of these projects. A full drainage impact analysis was not completed with the downflow analysis. Instead, here you see what we typically see, and that's that they will mitigate the difference between peak flow mitigation of post-development and pre-development flow rates. So what is staff's role in all of this review? I've just given you a lot of information from a lot of different staff members. For the most part, staff's doing a code review. So staff is ensuring that the project complies with current codes or that modifications or waivers are considered when necessary. Additionally, there's a policy review as part of these cases. Staff provides guidance on how a project can best conform to the policies that have been adopted by the city. The interdivision staff team, our IDS team, includes both types of reviews. We are many of us are looking at both code and policy. IDS approvals are indications from staff that the required code information has been relayed to the applicant and that all code requirements are met or addressed. A final policy analysis is provided by staff as part of the recommendation to both the Planning and Zoning Commission and then follows to the City Council in accordance with the required findings. So that takes us to the findings, the first finding of which is regional plan conformance. The proposed specific plan and concept zoning map amendment must be found to be consistent with and in conformance with the goals and policies of the general plan and any applicable specific plans. If the application is not consistent with the general plan and any other applicable specific plan, the applicable plan must be amended in compliance with the procedures established in Section 11 of City Code. So our comprehensive plan is the Flagstaff Regional Plan. If the specific plan is adopted, it will supplement the regional plan as well, and it will contain its own set of goals and policies for the development of the health village. So any future rezoning cases, as well as the current, need to be in compliance with the goals and policies that are presented within this specific plan as well. So there's 2 layers of policy review now that follow the NAH Health Village. I will tell you overall, there are a lot of goals and policies within the regional plan, and staff does the best they can to balance the priorities and needs between all of those goals and policies. And that leads me really quickly to carbon neutrality goals and policies, and I'm going to hand the mic off.
Good afternoon again, Mayor and Council. Christina Rubalcaba, Senior Assistant City Attorney. Just very briefly, because of some of the public comment we've received and some of other meetings, wanted to make sure that everyone was really clear about the weight of the different plans that the city has. So as you know, the city has passed a carbon neutrality plan, very important statement of council policy. However, compliance with the carbon neutrality plan is not a finding for either of NAH's applications. Instead, as Tiffany just went over, finding number 1 is compliance with our regional plan. Our regional plan was approved by council and the voters, although the voters did not approve subsequent amendments, just the original plan. And compliance with the regional plan is required for both NAH applications, both for the rezoning and for the specific plan. Now, there were certain amendments to the regional plan that incorporated some of the carbon neutrality goals that were listed in that carbon neutrality plan, and those changes to the regional plan were made in December of 2021. But these amendments, again, represent community goals. I think the one goal that I've heard was where before the regional plan said, I believe it was reduce greenhouse emissions, and it was changed to achieve carbon neutrality for the Flagstaff community by 2030. And that's a really important statement of the community's goals, but it was never intended and does not require any specific project getting approval to be carbon neutral. But those goals are amongst the goals that council can consider when council does its own analysis of regional plan conformance and comes to its own conclusions about finding number 1.
So finding number 2 is that the proposed amendment must be determined to not be detrimental to the public interest, health, safety, convenience, or welfare of the city, and will add to the general public good as described in the general plan. And finding number 3, that the site must be determined to be physically suitable in terms of design, location, shape, size, and operating characteristics, and the provision of public and emergency vehicle access, public services, and utilities to ensure that the requested zone designation and the proposed or anticipated uses and or development will not endanger, jeopardize, or otherwise constitute a hazard to the property or improvements to the vicinity in which the property is located. So can we serve it? Can the site handle the development that is proposed? Those are the particular findings. In terms of addressing some of those findings, as well as the applicant's commitment to certain portions of this development, a draft development agreement has been prepared and will be reviewed by the City Council on May 16th. Development agreements are now required to be noticed to the public, similar to other public hearing cases. So while I haven't prepared a full presentation tonight on the development agreement, there will be one on May 16th. The primary purpose of this development agreement is to set out the roles and responsibilities. So these are the items that are, this is just a highlight of what's in the development agreement. And again, on May 16th, we'll go through all of those fine point details. Of course, if you have questions, we're here to answer them. But I feel like this is a document that is on the move. It's not currently static. So, and we'll see how and if that document changes even more tonight. So the document does include provisions for that offsite water infrastructure improvements, the water storage requirements, the sewer reimbursement, on-site and off-site transportation improvements, fire department requirements, future affordable housing contributions, and sustainability contributions. Digging in a little further onto the on-site and off-site transportation improvements, there seems to be some confusion out there. NAH is required to provide all of the on-site and off-sites transportation improvements. Those transportation improvements are as described by Steph, but primarily focus on that Beulah corridor. It is their responsibility to provide those infrastructure improvements. In terms of fire department, as previously stated, the city needs a ladder company now. In working with NAH, we know we need to relocate that fire company. So NAH is willing to contribute 50% of the cost of a new fire station if a new fire station is deemed necessary to house that particular ladder company at a location that best serves NAH. Future affordable housing contribution, the property is not currently being rezoned for that housing piece, but of the 315 housing units that are anticipated to come in phase 2, the applicant has agreed to 10% affordable category 1 units, so that's 32 affordable units. Sustainability contributions, these have kind of been on the move, but the newest and greatest is that NAH has committed to provide solar panels on the garage at a 40% cover, which is approximately 22,000 square feet of solar panels and solar arrays. Of course, the remaining items still include buildings being designed to the 25th percentile Energy Star, buildings developed on site using best practices and high performance design, and of course the solar power panels that we've added here. So wrapping this presentation up, lots of citizen participation forever and always, but more importantly, the specific plan required a minimum of a 60-day notice before any planning and zoning commission. That had to go out to specific government agencies. To date, staff only received formal 60-day review comments from Coconino County, FUSD, and Friends of Flagstaff Future, all which were attached in one of the versions of public comments to your report. And the applicant did hold 3 neighborhood meetings for this application. They started early January 2022, ended up towards the end of the year in October 2022. Common themes of support included economic development impacts, better access to care and clinical services in the overall health and wellness vision. Common themes of concern included transit and bus service, access to the new campus, traffic, reuse of the existing NAH campus, helicopter, ambulance noise, and building height. So the specific plan recommendation, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended denial of this application due to nonconformance with the regional plan goals and policies. Their specific focus was that the part that I got the most from the Planning and Zoning Commission was that they didn't have sufficient information to determine if this particular development met the standards of the carbon neutrality goals and policies. They were also concerned in regards to public transit versus private transit. And lastly, they were concerned about the costs of infrastructure and what the ultimate cost would be for Flagstaff taxpayers. If the City Council is able to make the required findings for this application, staff recommends the following conditions of approval. There are 5 conditions. I will let you know that originally we had a lot more conditions built in. This has been sort of a long public hearing process, and we've continued to work through this document, make it better and improve it so that we can bring to you the best possible document. As part of this process, we were able to refine many of those original conditions of approval, so you're now seeing the streamlined final of what staff is recommending in terms of both of these cases. So here are the 5 conditions for the specific plan, and here are the 7 conditions for the rezoning case. And if you should have any questions or comments, we have lots of staff here. I would love to hand the mic over to somebody else.
Thank you, Tiffany. Great job, not only this afternoon, but throughout the entire process. This was a huge project, and you've handled it quite well from what I can see. Before we allow Tiffany to sit down, does council have any questions? Councilmember Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a clarification, can you go back 3 slides? So it was required for the proposal to be reviewed and further comment to all government agencies. And so you listed Coconino County, FUSD, and Friends of Flagstaff Future. They're not a government agency, correct?
That's correct. They weren't specifically notified, but we notified the public of the 60-day review process, and F-Cube did respond to that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, council?
You bet.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
I have a few. Thank you, Tiffany, so much for all the hard work. Your team is amazing. I just really am very impressed with the work you guys do. Couple quick questions here. During your presentation about lighting standards, you paused for a second and you said, hopefully, when talking about them being able to conform to Zone 2 lighting standards. Could you elaborate on that a little bit and just explain what your train of thought was there?
Absolutely. While we have been working on this project, we also amended and changed our lighting code standards. One of those particular lighting code standards, in some ways, they make working with the hospital a lot easier. In one way, it got a little difficult, and that is that there are certain areas of any property that we do allow to use white light, and those are areas where color rendition is important. So the ambulance entrance into the emergency room is one of those locations where color rendition is important. We have a limitation on white light of 2,700 Kelvin. The hospital was anticipating and hoping to use 3,700 Kelvin. The last we talked, they were gonna try to make that 2,700 Kelvin work, and it looks like that's where we're at. So I didn't 100% have that in my head at that moment when I got to that point, so I didn't wanna overstate. But there you go, looks like we're gonna make it work.
Wonderful, thank you. That's great news. And I know that NEH team has been responsive to my requests to adhere as strictly as possible to dark lighting standards, specifically for the national security mission that our U.S. Naval Observatory has and the relative proximity that those two places will have to each other. Another question, I was hoping you or maybe NEH during their presentation can elaborate on the statement they're going to evaluate options for amenities in terms of recreation facilities. So that seemed like a very loosey-goosey response to the question of whether or not they're going to come to the table with some great options for us. A promise to look at options isn't very, I don't want to, I'm getting tongue-tied here, but maybe you can just elaborate on that, and then for the NIH presenters, put that one in your queue for when you're presenting.
You know, since I've, this project, like I said, has not been static. It's been moving and growing and changing and adapting, and NIH has since committed to definitely incorporating an active recreation amenity and working with our pros team. So instead of just committing to looking at, they've committed to doing, owning and operating, maintaining.
Okay, yeah, I'm excited for a few more details on that. And then before you leave, can you put up the finding number 2 slide again? You were on that for about 2 seconds. And I wanted to take a little bit of a longer look and allow the public to get a longer look at it too. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Did you, Councilmember McCarthy?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to apologize to everyone for being late. I won't get into the reasons, but I can assure you it was a good reason. No kidding. In my 7 years on council, I've only missed 1 meeting, and that was, I had a good excuse that one too. It's my goal to be here for every meeting. All right, I read the development agreement, and Tiffany, you said it's a work in process, so some of these things, and the other thing is I might have missed some of this because I came in late. And some of this kind of ties into what Mr. Aslan just said. I see in the development agreement phrases like, "it is recommended," instead of "it is required." Those need to be resolved. I mean, what is recommended, just take it out, that's meaningless. If it's required, then it's part of a DA. Uh-oh, now the lawyers are up.
No, and I just wanted to say, the parts where you pointed me to, and thanks Councilmember McCarthy for emailing your comments to me earlier, I appreciate it, it does help so I can be prepared. The recommendations you're referring to talked about how there was a study, the study made recommendations, and as a result of the recommendations, these are the commitments. And so I think the recommendations, that are recommendations, it is a true statement that it's recommendations, because actually what the recommendation was from that study, the standards of cover study that Tiffany mentioned that we received in November of last year, was to place the ladder company at Station 6. That is actually impossible because of the size, so we can't comply specifically with that recommendation. We're gonna have to build a new station somewhere along the Lake Mary corridor. That is why the commitment is actually slightly different from the recommendation, but still meets the same goal.
Okay, so I'm okay with that for tonight, but I'll do a final read on the development agreement, and it hopefully will be very clear what is required and what is not required. Fire protection was one of the things, but there were other places that kind of wording. So I won't belabor it now, but we will come back to it in 2 weeks. And when I read the development agreement, the bit on solar panels was completely undefined and ambiguous. But I think I heard something about that tonight, about the time I walked in. So I won't get into that one either, but I guess the only point I'll make is that it needs to be definitive of what we are agreeing to, and it has to be significant. And I would ask that our sustainability people weigh in on that, what's significant and what isn't. All right, so my next comment has to do with traffic impact analysis. If I understand correctly, the events at the park were not included in the analysis. First of all, is that a true statement? Oh, I knew you'd come up. Thank you.
Yes, that is a true statement, and it was not included in the 2027 Phase 1 TIA.
So I guess I have sort of a secondary question then. Well, that may have been a reasonable decision. But my question is, there's certain times when the off-ramps get very crowded. So it occurs to me, well, the ambulances, because we don't want to slow down ambulances just because we're having picking in the pines or whatever. Are the shoulders wide enough, and you don't have to answer this now, but I'd like to answer by next week. Are the shoulders wide enough that the ambulance can bypass all that traffic that's going 1 mile an hour and get into the hospital? So you can come back to me on that next week.
If it's okay, I have a semi-answer to that.
Okay.
NIH is, and ADOT are having NIH build a bypass lane off the off-ramp. So southbound I-17 off the freeway, northbound onto Beulah. So it's a lane separated from the two roundabouts, and it will bypass the two roundabouts. So granted, that's not answering your question about the width of the shoulder and if it will be wide enough, but that is an improvement that will be made for this Phase 1.
Okay, it sounds like you've thought that one through, so good. And then my last one is, I see that Purple Sage Trail, when I look at my maps, which I printed out here, it looks like half of it's on the county land and half of it's on the developer's land. Has the county given permission to widen that road into their land? And again, well, here, Tiffany, she knows everything.
It's actually a much smaller amount. So there's an existing public access easement over the area now. The preliminary plat that will subdivide and include the right-of-way and shows the right-of-way does not actually include that particular area, so it falls outside. It would have to come through a separate dedication if the county was willing to dedicate that land. I think whether or not the county is willing to dedicate that land is a question better answered by Coconino County and the applicant. There is a preliminary plat that is currently moving its way through the review process and will hopefully be making it to you, to your way soon. It is possible, however, that Purple Sage could be relocated entirely on NAH's property. We were just trying to work to make sure that adequate access was provided to Fort Tuthill. But if that doesn't work for Coconino County, there's alternatives.
Okay, and I guess what I'm hearing is that that'll be determined on the final plat. And at that point, everyone affected will hopefully be in agreement.
It's actually outside of the boundaries of the plat, so if the right-of-way is necessary, they'll need to receive that as a separate dedication, but would accompany the plat, and we should have that issue resolved by final plat. I'm hoping to have it resolved by preliminary plat.
All right, Mayor, I have other comments, but I think at this point, these are more like questions for staff. I'll wait to make comments. I presume we have not had public comment yet. Is that true? Okay, so I can come back with my other comments a little bit later tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember McCarthy. Councilmember Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor. Tiffany, I just wanted to have you restate again so we're clear, because this question or comment came up a lot from the community. We have a ladder truck now, or it's coming, that we got through, I think, the bond, correct? Regardless, irrespectful of the hospital, what we need is to have it located closer to the hospital, or we need to staff it at Station 6 in a different location because of the hospital. We didn't need the ladder truck because of the hospital, we already have that. And we already are missing the staff to man that ladder truck. But because of the hospital's requested move, that changes the location of where that ladder truck is housed, which also then requires that staff that we need anyway for the truck, correct?
Yes.
Council, other questions? I have a couple. The draft development agreement discusses public access to the open space. Is there an easement to the public open space that the public can easily get to?
So we do have an easement. It will be attached to the final development agreement. It is in the process of being reviewed internally through staff to make sure that the language is correct. Words matter. We had some things in there saying passive recreation. We need to make sure it included active. We wanted to make sure that there were some specific hours of which when the public could expect the space to be open. I think we ended up with dusk to dawn. There are provisions in there for NAH to close the access to the public for maintenance, or if they were to have a special event on the property along those lines. So there's provisions built in for them as well on the easement. And what's great about the easement is it'll live in perpetuity, where the development agreement only lasts for 40 years.
Thank you. And regarding Purple Sage and the underpass, I know this has gone back and forth a number of times, and I believe that the applicant would like to would like to not grade at this point and then provide the money for the grading later. And I would like staff to address the pros and cons of both of those approaches.
Right now or at a later date?
When could staff do that?
Steph, do you want to do that now? Jeff, do you want to?
I'd like to hear about it now, too.
Come on up.
He loves it when I do this to him.
I'm sure you all do.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Jeff Bowman, City Traffic Engineer. Always love this microphone. Pros and cons of building the road, which is actually Beulah and the Purple Sage intersection. Of course, as Stephanie had shown on that map, is a future connection under I-17. That might help, actually. Under I-17 to the east. It's not a roadway that's required as part of the mitigation for this project, but we expect at some point in the future, and we don't know when that is. It's all dependent on how much development activity occurs, specifically in the southwest part of the city. But so that's kind of the background on the road. Pros and cons, obviously it's much less expensive at the moment to not build the grades sufficient to go under the freeway. It will be more expensive in the future to do that, but there's definitely trade-offs. I understand that the platting process is going to accommodate all of the land necessary, so if the road needs to be graded in the future, it will not, it's not an unexpected thing for the site development, so it's not like buildings will have to be moved or demolished. We'll plan for all of that now. Trying to think on the fly. And it would be good to ask the applicant as well the same question, because I think they've thought about this a lot more than we have.
I will.
Yeah, perfect. So cost, there's obviously uncertainty. We don't know when this will be needed. We think it will be needed in the future at some point. It's on the regional plan. It continues to be on the regional plan, but there's definitely uncertainty. It's not a guarantee. So that's a big plus of not doing anything now, is we just don't know for sure. Can't think of anything else really critical at this moment. Got anything?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tiffany, could someone from maybe Stormwater or Water Services speak to any potential maintenance issues or any potential problems, concerns with having the approach already graded but not connecting to anything under I-17?
I apologize. I was working on something else. Are we talking about the drainage that goes under I-17?
If they were to grade for the eventual underpass.
Oh, okay. With that, can you ask your question again?
I certainly can. So there's a question about whether to go ahead and grade for the future underpass under 17, or to commit the money to do it later. And so my question is, what are pros and cons of doing it now versus doing it later? And specifically, what would be concerns from Water Services about infrastructure, potential flooding, any maintenance issues if it were to be graded now?
So not being familiar with the grading in that area, one, yes, we would have to make sure that it drains. We don't want to and don't allow for pumps to be put in for stormwater on a general basis. We do on certain occasions. So that's one aspect as it pertains to stormwater. For the water and sewer facilities specifically, there are water and sewer facilities constructed at this intersection, or will be constructed at this intersection. If they are constructed with the intersection at a higher level today, and there's future plans to lower that intersection, all of those utilities would have to be lowered as well when that intersection is regraded or reconstructed. So there would be an additional cost associated with constructing it at a higher elevation today and then rebuilding that in the future. So you'd have those utility conflicts that you'd have to deal with. Does that answer the question?
Would the costs of those be borne by the applicant?
I think that's, I would assume so. So I don't know the mechanism by which they would be required to post an assurance or something like that, but that would definitely have to be included as part of the cost to reconstruct that intersection.
Okay, thank you. And do you have any concerns about flooding or maintenance issues if it were to be graded to, when the project is first constructed?
Again, I'm not familiar enough with that intersection or that proposed intersection to know where it would drain today. There are not any flooding concerns in that area today, and any potential flooding issues would need to be mitigated as part of the project. So that would be something we would address as part of civil plan review.
That's part of so that's fundamentally the issue is that we haven't gotten that far in the engineering design of what that particular, how that intersection would work with the grading. So we have a lot of presuppositions about what that might look like, but we haven't gone through that process of vetting that civil design.
And where does that fall in the process? Would that come after the project was rejected or approved? Well, I guess it wouldn't come after if the project wasn't approved, but it would come after. Is that correct?
Generally, the civil plans are completed after we have an approved preliminary plat. So that preliminary plat is going to go through Planning and Zoning Commission and come through you as City Council. There may be necessary engineering modification requirements as part of that process. We would also bring those forward as part of that review. But yes, that detailed civil plan pretty much happens between preliminary plat and final plat. Part of what's been the struggle for us is determining what is going to be the final design of this intersection. So it's sort of been delaying us back and forth in the preliminary in terms of jumping into that civil plan, that full civil plan design. We've had some preliminary work done, but until I think that final engineering design is done and we're in that midst, will we have this very specific answer for you?
I'd like to see some additional information on that, because I think that that's a crucial question. Thank you. Councilmember McCarthy,
Do you mind if I add one more thing?
No, please do.
One thing that I think is a thing that we need to consider is if we do not build this intersection at grades today, and it comes back in the future and we need to build it then, we need to talk about traffic control. Closing down Beulah to drop it 20 feet, I'm just throwing that out of my head from memory. Ambulances getting to the hospital for this traffic control and for this construction in the future when this needs to be built. Just trying to think about it and the difficulties of doing that. Thank you.
thank you. Councilmember McCarthy.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I've done some thinking and asking questions about this intersection. And one of my thoughts was maybe we don't even need to build this underpass. So I will say that I have talked to city staff and I've talked to Metro Plan staff, and there seems to be a strong consensus that it may not be needed at this point in time, but in the near future, when the hospital's built and some other things that we anticipate, it definitely will be required.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Sweet.
Hi, Tiffany, thank you so much for all of your work and staff. I can't believe that we're here and the presentation is well thought out, and I appreciate that. I have a question on the solar. Do we have a specific timeline? It's kind of a new added bonus to the project and one that I was going to ask for, so happy on that, but I would like to hear the timeline and if it's definitive.
Sure, the current commitment is 2030, knowing that the hospital is anticipated around 2027, so you're looking at like 3 years after opening of the hospital.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so thank you, Tiffany and staff. So staff's presentation was 45 minutes, and the applicant is given 45 minutes for their presentation. I'm anticipating that we will take a break after